Picture this: Berlin, 1923. You're a factory worker and it's 11 in the morning. A 5-ton lorry pulls into the courtyard. The chief cashier climbs on top and starts throwing bundles of banknotes into the crowd. You catch yours and you run. Not walk, run. Because your wife is already at the factory gate with a wheelbarrow. She takes the money and sprints to the baker before noon. Because after noon, the shopkeeper remarks every price. The coffee you could buy for 5,000 marks this morning costs 14,000 marks by noon. The newspaper that cost 50,000 marks at breakfast costs 100,000 by evening. A Berlin journalist named Friedrich Kroner documented it in real time. The banknote, still moist from the printer, paid out as a weekly wage, shrinks in value on the way to the grocer's shop. You had to move faster than the printing press. That was survival in Weimar Germany. Now here's the question several of you asked after the last video. You're stacking coins, you're holding physical gold and silver, and you want to know, when paper money actually dies, how do you spend it? What do you hand someone? What does that transaction look like in practice? The forensic record from Germany, 1921 to 1923, gives a specific answer, and it is not the answer most people in this community expect. Here's what blows people's minds. Most ordinary Germans didn't have gold when the hyperinflation hit. Not because they failed to prepare, because the government had already taken it. 9 years before the crisis. Voluntarily, with a campaign so effective it stripped an entire middle class of its only real protection, before they ever knew they'd need it. The gold was gone before the crisis started, not seized at gunpoint, donated, and that changes everything about how we should think about what comes next. Let me show you the forensic record, because this story has been told 100 times and almost always wrong. The first thing the forensic record shows, what actually happened to the gold? August 4th, 1914, the first day of World War I. The Reichsbank suspends gold convertibility. From that day, the German government runs a campaign with a slogan, Gold für Eisen, gold for iron. Citizens are encouraged to donate gold jewellery, watches, wedding rings. In exchange, they receive iron replacements, stamped with the words, I gave gold for the defence of the fatherland. Millions of ordinary Germans complied. They were patriotic. They trusted their institutions. By 1923, when bread cost 200 billion marks a loaf, and the mark lost 30% of its value while you stood in line, the gold was already gone. Not confiscated at gunpoint during the crisis, donated 9 years earlier, voluntarily, in exchange for iron. The people who still held gold in 1923 were not ordinary Germans. They were the wealthy who had quietly evaded the campaign. Industrialists with international connections. Those with enough foresight to hoard while everyone around them was surrendering. The lesson no one talks about. The government didn't need to confiscate gold during the crisis. It had already solved that problem. Before anyone understood there would be a crisis. The gold was gone before the crisis started. Not seized at gunpoint. Donated. If you're watching this and you have gold in your hands right now, understand what that actually means. You are already in a different position than most Germans were in 1923. The question is what you do with it when the moment comes. The second thing the forensic record shows, what people actually used as money. It was not gold coins handed across a shop counter. The documented record is specific on this. The closest thing to a universal survival currency during the Weimar hyperinflation was the US dollar. A British diplomatic dispatch from 1922, filed by Lord Dabennon, the British ambassador in Berlin, reported that he hardly knew a German of either sex who wasn't speculating in foreign currencies. Millions were hoarding foreign banknotes, not gold. Dollars, pounds, Swiss francs. Stefan Zweig, the Austrian writer who lived through it, put it directly. Whoever had foreign currency to exchange did so from hour to hour. Ernest Hemingway filed dispatches from Kael, Germany, for the Toronto Star in September 1922. He crossed the Rhine from France with 10 francs, 90 cents in Canadian money. He and his wife spent the day heavily. At the end of it, they had 120 marks left over. The bakery he visited was constantly swamped with Frenchmen crossing from France to exploit the exchange rate. That was one side. Now the other. Hemingway also documented what happened to Germans without foreign currency. He bought 5 apples and paid with a 50-mark note. The woman gave back 38 marks in change, 12 marks for 5 apples, less than 2 cents in real money. A white-haired German gentleman standing nearby tipped his hat and asked how much the apples cost. Hemingway told him. The man shook his head. "I can't pay it. It is too much." That man was not poor by German standards. He had savings. He had trusted his institutions his whole life. And 12 marks, 2 cents, was beyond what he could afford. That is what a hyperinflation does to savings. Not a sudden crash. A slow, daily grinding until 12 marks is the difference between eating and not eating. Pre-war German gold coins existed. The 20-mark gold piece, 7.16 grams of pure gold. These coins held their value absolutely. 1 gold mark in 1914 bought the same basket of goods as 1 gold mark in 1924 after stabilization. They were the right asset. But here's what the forensic record actually shows about how they were used. They were hoarded, not spent. Gresham's law in its purest form. Bad money drives out good. When paper marks circulated alongside gold, nobody spent gold. They spent the paper and kept the coin. By the final stages of the crisis, shops began refusing paper marks entirely and demanding gold or foreign currency. But by then, most ordinary Germans had neither. This is the gap between what the gold community discusses and what the documented record shows. Holding gold is the right instinct, but understanding how gold actually functions in a live hyperinflation is a different question entirely. The third thing the forensic record shows, what the transactions actually looked like. Anna Eisenmenger was a Viennese widow. She kept a diary of her survival. On New Year's Day 1919, she used her late husband's gold watch chain to barter for 4 bags of potatoes. Not to buy, to barter. Gold chain to potatoes. Direct exchange. No change given. No price posted. 2 people who agreed on value. She also wrote this. Panic bids defiance to all legal decrees. Even the most respectable of Austrian citizens now breaks the law unless he is prepared to starve for the sake of obeying it. Stefan Zweig documented what happened when gold and dollars were unavailable. People used wedding rings, family silverware, paintings, fine china, books. He described rural farmhouses filling up with pianos, leather-bound books and crystal, accumulated from city families who brought them to the countryside and traded them for potatoes and milk. The farmers were happy to take them. The mark they refused. A wedding ring for a bag of potatoes. That is the actual transaction at the street level of a hyperinflation. By late 1923, over 4,000 separate entities were printing their own emergency money, not Geld, necessity money, on paper, ceramic, leather, silk, wood, and compressed coal dust. The Krupp steelworks in Essen printed Krupp marks for their workers. It became the only stable currency in the city. And here is the detail that most people never hear. The most significant not Geld was denominated not in marks at all, but in stable real-world units. Rye, wheat, coal, kilowatt-hours of electricity, cubic meters of water. A rye-denominated bond issued in Oldenburg in 1922 paid 125 kilograms of rye and was redeemable 4 years later at 150 kilograms. A 4.5% yield. In rye. Not in marks, in rye. When the official unit of account collapses, the economy does not stop. It reprices everything in whatever unit holds stable value. In 1923 Germany, that was the dollar, the rye bushel, the kilowatt hour, and the gold coin, in roughly that order of daily usefulness. If you're realizing that the story you've been told about gold in Weimar Germany is missing most of its most important chapters, hit the subscribe button. This channel runs the forensic record, not the legend. And there is a lot more in this record that changes the calculation about what you should be doing right now. The fourth thing the forensic record shows: who survived and who didn't. The people most destroyed by the Weimar hyperinflation were not the poor. The poor had little to lose. The people most destroyed were the educated middle class. Doctors, lawyers, professors, civil servants. The Bildungsbürgertum, as Germans called them. They had bought war bonds out of patriotism. They had savings accounts. They had life insurance policies with guaranteed nominal payouts. They had done everything right by every rule they had ever been taught. Maximilian Bern was an elderly Berlin man. He withdrew his life savings of 100,000 marks, once enough for a comfortable retirement. In 1923, it bought one subway ticket. He took a last ride around his city, then he returned to his apartment. Historian Frederick Taylor documented what happened next. Walter Levy's father took out a life insurance policy in 1903. He paid monthly for 20 years. When it came due in 1923, he cashed it in. He bought one loaf of bread. A life insurance policy paid monthly for 20 years. One loaf of bread. These are not metaphors. These are documented cases, named individuals, verified outcomes. The people who survived were those who held assets with real utility or international exchangeability. The landowner who borrowed paper marks before the crisis and used them to buy a farm repaid the entire loan in worthless currency, effectively buying the farm for free. The farmer who produced his own food stopped accepting marks entirely and watched city families bring him silverware and paintings in exchange for potatoes. And at the very top of the survivor list, Hugo Stinnes, the man Time magazine in 1923 called the new Emperor of Germany. Before and during the hyperinflation, Stinnes borrowed enormous sums in Reichsmarks and used them to buy hard assets: coal mines, steel factories, shipping lines, newspapers, hotels. He stored his profits as gold in Swiss bank vaults. He repaid every debt in paper marks worth a fraction of what he had borrowed. Stefan Zweig described him as having purchased coal mines, ships, factories, and country estates, actually for nothing. Borrowed in the collapsing currency, bought real assets, stored profits in gold offshore, repaid debts in paper. That is the single most documented wealth preservation strategy from the worst hyperinflation in Western history. It has nothing to do with handing a gold coin to a baker. Now, what the forensic record says you actually do. The question several of you asked is, how do I transact in gold and silver when paper money is dying? The honest, documented answer is that you mostly don't, not in the way the question implies. What the people who survived actually did breaks into 4 documented methods. The first was private barter. Gold and silver transacted in direct person-to-person exchange. A coin for a month of rent, a watch chain for potatoes, jewellery for farmland access. 2 people agreed on value. No change, no receipt, no price tag. Anna Eisenmenger's watch chain for 4 bags of potatoes. That is the documented form of the transaction. The second was conversion to the parallel currency of the moment. In Weimar, that was the US dollar. Ernest Hemingway as the documented case. He crossed the Rhine with francs, converted at an unofficial rate, spent freely, came out ahead while his German neighbours could not afford apples. In every documented hyperinflation, one foreign currency becomes the functional unit of account before the official currency fully fails. Gold holders who understood this converted their gold to that currency at unofficial exchange points, then transacted in dollars. The third was commodity indexing. You stopped pricing anything in the collapsing currency. You priced it in rye, in coal, in kilowatt hours. The Krupp workers paid in Krupp marks convertible to food. The Oldenburg bonds denominated in rye bushels. When the unit of account breaks down, commerce reorganizes around whatever unit holds stable value. The people who understood this priced their assets in stable units before they needed to. The fourth was speed. Sebastian Haffner, who was a boy in Berlin in 1923, described his father's payday ritual in his memoir. Receive the salary, immediately buy a monthly transit pass, haircuts, then convert whatever remained into dry goods before the next pay period. You did not hold paper overnight. You treated every payment as a token to be immediately converted into something real. The people who thought of wages as savings were destroyed. The people who thought of wages as temporary tokens to be exchanged the same day they arrived survived. None of these four methods requires handing a gold coin to a cashier at a register. All four require having thought through the problem before the crisis arrives. Here is the line that Stefan Zweig wrote about the people who didn't think it through in time. Slow thinking and reliance on previous experience were punished with hunger and death. Impulsive action and swift comprehension of a new situation were rewarded. Swift comprehension, not the right coin, the right mental model, built before the moment it's needed. Now, the end of the crisis, and what it means for gold holders today. November 15th, 1923. The German government introduces a new currency called the Rentenmark. The official story: it was backed by mortgages on agricultural land and industrial bonds, a stable anchor after the chaos of the papier mark. The forensic record: the backing was largely fictional. Hjalmar Schacht, the man credited with the stabilization, later admitted he found it hard to believe anyone felt reassured, knowing their currency was theoretically convertible into some remote woodland in Thuringia. The Rentenmark was not even legal tender, just a legal means of payment, and yet prices stabilized within days. Schacht ran the stabilization from a broom closet that still smelled of floor cloths. His secretary described his daily routine. He sat in his dark room and smoked. He telephoned a great deal. What he actually did was enforce one rule absolutely: the Rentenmark supply was capped. The government would no longer receive unlimited credit from the printing press. That single commitment, credibly enforced, was enough. The crisis that took 2 years to build collapsed in 2 weeks. Rudolf Havenstein, the Reichsbank president who had boasted in August 1923 that the bank was issuing 20,000 billion new marks daily and planned to double it, died of a heart attack on November 20th, 1923, the same day Schacht stabilized the currency. The man who killed the mark died the day it was buried. And here is what this means for the gold holders watching this video. The gold that was still in private hands on November 15th, 1923, not donated to the iron campaign, not spent on food during the crisis, not surrendered at a black market rate out of desperation, was suddenly denominated in Rentenmarks at the pre-war gold parity. 1 gold mark in 1914 equaled 1 gold mark in 1924. The people who held physical gold through the entire disaster came out the other side with their purchasing power intact. The people who spent their gold during the crisis got food. That was the right call for survival. But the people who held through the crisis and survived on barter, on dollars, on speed, they came out whole. Both were right. That is the honest answer the forensic record gives. Now, the question this entire video has been building toward. The US debt to GDP ratio stood at 32% during the 1970s. It stands at 121% today. The Federal Reserve's balance sheet went from 4.2 trillion to 9 trillion between 2020 and 2022. M2 money supply jumped 25% in 2020 alone, the largest single-year expansion in American history. Central banks globally bought more than 1,000 tons of gold in 2022, more than 1,000 in 2023, more than 1,000 in 2024. 3 consecutive years above 1,000 tons, double the prior decade's average. These are not the actions of institutions that are confident in the long-term stability of paper currency. These are the actions of institutions hedging against a scenario they are not discussing publicly. The forensic record from Germany, 1914 to 1923, gives you one framework for reading those actions. The gold was gone from ordinary hands before the crisis because ordinary people trusted institutions that were quietly preparing for something different. The people who came through were those who had already acted on what the evidence showed, before the moment of crisis made acting clearly impossible. The German middle class trusted their institutions. They gave their gold for iron. They kept their savings in marks. They held their life insurance policies and their war bonds. A life insurance policy paid monthly for 20 years bought one loaf of bread. The forensic record of what happened to the people who trusted institutions and what happened to the people who trusted gold is specific, documented, and 100 years old. The question is not whether you've heard of Weimar Germany. The question is whether you've read the actual autopsy. Several of you asked in the comments what happened to the people who held gold through the stabilization